Hello, Scuttlebutt listeners. Today I'm here with Nancy,
Hi.
and today we are interviewing our esteemed guest, a writer for Leatherneck, Kyle Watts. Kyle, how are you today?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
We're doing great. We're happy to have you on our show. So, if you don't mind, just give the audience a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you wound up to be the illustrious writer for Leatherneck.
All right. Well, I definitely consider myself probably the luckiest person in the world right now with this job. It's been a dream job of mine for a while. Uh, but I've been writing for Leatherneck for a little over 10 years now as a freelancer. Started, I think it was back in 2013.
That
Yeah, I
sounds
think
about
that,
right.
yeah, I think that was my first story that I published for them was July 2013. And wrote that as I was coming off of active duty in the Marines. Forwarded that on to Colonel Walt Ford, who was the editor at the time, and somehow he, I don't know, somehow he felt the need to publish it. I still can't believe he did, but thankfully that got the relationship started, and then continued with Mary once she came on as the editor, and been writing for him ever since. I'm originally from Ohio. My family still lives there. That's where I was born and raised. And now, by way of some previous civilian jobs, I'm living in Richmond, Virginia, and we've been here about 6 years now.
Awesome. So, you did mention you started in the Marine Corps. Do you mind just talking a little bit about your experiences, like when you got in, any deployments you went on, and then how'd you go transition from being a Marine to a writer?
Sure. So I served on active duty from 2009 to 2013. I was a communications officer. Got out as a captain. No deployments during that time. I had kind of a unique billet as the MAG S6 for Marine Aircraft Group 39 out at Camp Pendleton. Um, and yeah, basically just after I finished my training, got to go spend the last few years of my contract out in San Diego. So um, it's not the worst way, I guess, to spend some time on active duty, but also I didn't quite get to do everything that I guess I didn't join the Marine Corps to go spend 2 years in San Diego, but so didn't need to do everything that I'd hoped to do, I guess, while I was on active duty, but that's okay. Uh, Before I was on active duty, I got a degree as a history major, um, which is kind of how I was able to get my commission as an officer with a bachelor's degree. At the time, they basically just told me, you know, you need a degree, doesn't matter what it's in. Um, so I had always loved history, so that's why I changed my major to that. And I just knew I didn't really feel like going back to Ohio and living in my mom's basement anymore or something like that, I guess. So the Marine Corps sounded like a good option for me, and history seemed like just something that I would enjoy. Um, and then uh, while I was on active duty, while I was still in Quantico, I kind of had like a weird, I don't know, like 4 or 6 month period, something like that, between training evolutions. And during that time, they had me work at the Marine Corps Museum, and I got to work in the armory with the curators there. And so I think that was probably like the first time where I kind of realized, like, man, my my interest in history and my degree, could actually be used for something professionally, not just like something that I enjoy or whatever. So as I, left that, went to California, and then was starting to come off active duty, I guess I was just kind of looking for ways to, or exploring different options for how I could maybe use my degree for a job. And I guess just initially just trying to build my resume a little bit with getting myself published was kind of my initial motivation for trying to have a Leatherneck publish my work. And none of that, of course, worked out because I spent 6 years in manufacturing, which is the furthest thing from history, but whatever.
I'm sure you learned good skills though.
Oh, I definitely did. Yeah. That was like a total culture shock and just in every way that you can imagine, going from active duty in the Marine Corps to being a supervisor on night shift in a warehouse or something like that. Yeah, that was just it was not the easiest transition to the civilian world, but somehow during that time I just continued writing. I think the second story that I wrote is one that Colonel Ford actually suggested to me out of the blue. I guess somebody had it was a story on the Van Orden family, three generations of Marines, and someone had recommended or asked to see that written, and he actually sent me that story idea and asked me if I'd want to do it. And yeah, definitely. So, uh, yeah. So somehow I was just able to continue writing during that time, even though we were, my wife and I were uh, busy with the civilian world and growing our family and everything. But yeah.
I remember.
Sorry,
Go
Nancy,
ahead.
go.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I remember that Van Orden story, but I also remember I was a copy editor here at Leatherneck at the time. I remember your first article. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was about John Moses Browning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I remember about that is when I first started editing it, I was like, wait a minute, why are more of our writers not like this? I immediately loved your style. And I remember going to Walt and saying, okay, can we get him to write again? Are we going to see more of this? Because he's good. True story. Not just
See,
trying to inflate your ego.
well, see, I read that story and I immediately want to throw it in the trash because it just was it was a very academic. It's just it's not remotely close to what I like to write now. That was I didn't interview a single person for that. I just read like 20 books and tried to compile everything I learned together.
Well, that brings up an interesting point because I sort of experienced the same thing when writing for Gazette or Leatherneck versus writing as a professional historian. And a lot of journalists make good historians, but not necessarily a lot of historians make good journalists. How do you manage, I guess, to write for a more journalistic audience despite being trained to be a historian?
Sure. So I think for me, it's all about like writing about the people and the individual stories rather than trying to analyze like the 10,000-foot view of everything or whatever. Figuring out like the tactics and the who did what right or who did what wrong. I generally try to not care about any of that stuff. I just try to tell the story of the person who was there, and if I can tell the story of like five people who were there all together, that will give a pretty darn good picture, I think, of what may have actually happened at whatever the event is that I'm writing about.
So what is your process from you have a conception, an idea if you want to write an article, where do you start and then how do you get to the finished product like when it finally gets released in Leatherneck?
So I mean, I guess where I try to start is just, to me personally, what what do I want to know about it? I try to figure out like what are some things that maybe everybody already would have heard or might know, and if not, like how do I tell that story? Like what are the main points that people need to know? I've told Nancy and Mary this when she was here, but I always say that my wife is my best editor because despite having been with me through my entire time in the Marine Corps, somehow she still knows like nothing about the Marine Corps. So I always just say that if I can get Bridget to understand like the the main point of the story, then I've successfully written that story. And so if I'm writing like every single detail about what type of rifle was used and how many Marines were in the battalion and what battalion it was and what regiment they were a part of and what division they were a part, just like all the details that in the end, like, they should be mentioned because they matter to identify who it was, but I guess they're not like the main point of the story, I guess, trying to weed out some of those details, I guess, just to um, just stick to the main point of the story, which is usually whatever the story is that the veteran is telling me.
So Leatherneck has a pretty diverse array of audiences and people who read it. Who do you think you target specifically when you write?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of story I'm writing. Up until recently, a lot of what I've written about is Vietnam veterans, and I think my personal goal with that would be to try to reach some of the younger Marines, maybe like, my age and younger, I would say, or even just younger than Vietnam era. And I think that would be my goal, just because I just feel like there's so much that's kind of unknown about the Vietnam War. Um, so
Such
much that,
as
well, these they what I've experienced and speaking with these guys is just that, they kind of came home to a country that didn't really want to hear their stories, and in fact even discouraged them from not even just telling their stories, but from even identifying themselves as having been in the military in the first place. And on top of that, um, not even like a beginning understanding of PTSD, or recognizing that you know they may need to talk through some of these things, and things like that. So I just feel like a lot of the Vietnam veterans that I've had the opportunity to interview, I'll speak with them, write about them, and then learn later that whatever they shared with me was the first time they've shared that with anybody, and it's just like, holy cow, I wouldn't have expected that.
And Kyle, you've talked about this before, but at, initially those Vietnam veterans were resistant to talk to anybody, even you. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you were able to break through that initially and get those Marines to trust you, and how you continue to do that, your approach? Because I think it's really special to hear you talk about that.
Sure. So I mean, usually I can use my good looks and nice white teeth and all, but no, I'm just kidding. No, I think that initially, yeah, I'm just random whoever, Joe Schmo, reaching out to these guys. So why would they talk to me? Why should they? I think that um uh having even as a freelancer, having the name of Leatherneck behind me certainly helped. If I truly was just whoever whoever I am, reaching out to him in the first place, I don't think that would have went over well at all. But being able to present myself as a writer for Leatherneck, I think certainly helped. But even with that, um, I'd had several uh, relatively tense exchanges, just kind of still like, the general attitude towards me is, who are you? And why are you trying to ask about these things? Um, I think that kind of generally the way that I was able to earn some trust initially was just to try to be open with what I had in mind for the story, how I wanted to write it and present it. Um, had a few good experiences interviewing people. Um, and then those individuals were able to kind of vouch for me, I guess, and to some of their their fellow veterans who I was trying to speak with. And then after that, I was able to actually, once I was able to get some stories published, then it became much easier because I could then say, hey, Mr. So and so, a Vietnam veteran, I'm a writer for Leatherneck. I'd like to interview you about this story. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in reading something that I've written about Vietnam veterans before, here's here's a story that you can read, because, and I think that was a pretty key step as far as being able to get my foot in the door, because the perception even over 50 years later now is that media equals, or press equals bad, or anti anti-military, anti-marine, going to present their story in a negative light. So once I was able to kind of show that, yeah, that was not, would never be my intent, that definitely made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, you definitely don't have exploiting your subjects as part of your agenda. And in fact, one of the things that I think as an editor that makes your work for Leatherneck so special and so unique is that you are an advocate not just for Leatherneck readers, but you're sort of the advocate for the people whose stories you're telling.
Sure.
You're kind of their person.
Yeah, and that's been, that's been kind of eye-opening for me too, as far as how far that can go. Like I didn't even realize um, how true that can be. For example, some of the stories that I've written in the past about some Vietnam vets, one of the guys that I interviewed, um, I was able to speak with him, write the story, have it published, and uh, he then came back and told me after it was published, like he gave the, once it was printed and he had the hard copy, like he gave it to his wife, and she read it for him, or she read it, and that was the first time she had ever heard or known the stories that he had told me, and she called him her hero. It just,
Wow.
like, hearing him say that, I was like, holy cow. I mean, I just never
Wow.
in my life would have expected that I would have the opportunity to hear some of these stories from these guys that they've never even told, their wives, their friends, their families, and then have the responsibility of writing it. And like you said, Nancy, kind of being their advocate. Like, how do I, man, then it's so much more than just trying to make sure that I present it in like a not a positive light, but like a, you know, making them look good type. It's so much more important than that. It's like, I got to get it.
Authentic.
What's that?
Is the authenticity what you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. I got to get it right. These are stories that some of these veterans have carried with them for the last 50 years, and now they're willing to share it with me, and trusting me to share it with all of the readers of Leatherneck magazine. And I better get it right.
In fact, as a result of one of your stories, didn't you arrange for two Marines to have a reunion? Marines who hadn't seen or really, can you talk? You know exactly what I'm getting at. Can you just
Yeah,
tell the story so I don't have to stumble over my words?
sure. Yeah, that's definitely my favorite example ever, was with the flying ladder story that I wrote. I spoke with, primarily Bob Buda and Dave Thompson were two of the main veterans that I spoke with on that story. And um, they, the whole time that I was speaking with them, both of them kept mentioning the pilot that was flying the helicopter that rescued Dave and his force recon team off the ground and saved their lives. And they kept mentioning the pilot and pointed me to his Navy Cross citation. His name's Larry Adams, Lawrence R. Adams III. I could see his name, I could read his Navy Cross citation. But basically, since Vietnam, no one had ever seen or heard from him, and I just started thinking like, man, it would just be so cool if I could find this guy. So I took a few weeks and I did some digging as best I could, and somehow I actually found him through LinkedIn, and I was able to reach out to him, and he was one of the ones who really did not want to talk to me. But thankfully, his lovely wife Chris was able to help convince him that sharing his side of the story for Flying Ladder would be a good thing for him. And so, yeah, I was able to call him and speak with him and interview him. And then after that, um, not in person, but we were able to have like a conference call. It was like 52 years after the last, it had been 52 years since they had seen each other on that day when Larry Adams rescued that Force Recon team, and they were able to reconnect over the phone at least. And Larry's wife Chris joined us on the call, and yeah, that was just a really special thing hearing them kind of talk about it, remember it together, and yeah, just reconnect. That was pretty cool.
And you wrote about that for the magazine as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the Flying Ladder story, because you're too modest, that was your award-winning article, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, what year was that?
I think that was
2017 or 2018?
I think it was 2017. Yeah.
So you were the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation Robert Debs Heinel Award winner that year.
Yeah.
So very, very impressive. Kyle, you are too modest to say it, so I'm going to say it for you. We were all so proud of you, and it was a much deserved award because that story was incredible, and beautifully told, beautifully written, and unbelievably, you continue to top that month after month after month with just telling people's stories in such a, William, I'm going to steal your word, in such an authentic way, in such a way that as a reader, I feel like I'm right there, or that I'm watching the movie of it, or it's, you have a real gift and a way with words.
Thank you.
And we're really happy to have you here.
I love it, Nancy. You're really asking the very hard-hitting questions over here.
No, I'm not. No.
Question number one: why are you so awesome?
Yes, I'm sorry. This is just a gush fest because Kyle does such a great job, and really Leatherneck readers of all ages react and respond to his storytelling ability, and it's that storytelling. I mean, William, it's what we talk about with Scuttlebutt all the time. Is it's not just hey, this is what happened, but telling people stories, and there's this whole group of veterans, particularly the Vietnam veterans, who, as you said, Kyle, they haven't told their stories, and so they need someone to tell the stories for them, and that's not so easy to do. And Kyle does that for us.
So Kyle, have you strictly touched on with Vietnam veterans, or have you done any other generations of veterans in any of your articles or interviews?
Yeah. So, well, first, I appreciate the kind words, Nancy. That's very nice. I don't know. Hopefully, I can continue doing a good job, but it has been a challenge since I took on the full-time role as staff writer because I'm trying to write a lot more, write a lot faster, and William, to your question, definitely recently have taken on some other eras of Marine Corps vets, which has been really cool, and I think a good transition for me. In January this year, I think was my first. I think that was the writing about Marine Corps tattoos. I think
it
that
was. Yeah.
I think that might have been my first one, interviewing some newer generation, and that was awesome. That was a lot of fun. And then after that, writing about Adam Crick and Goons Up with the Spirit of Barcelona Award. That was also a lot of fun. But I think they were good. I think they were kind of good uh, stepping stones, I guess, towards writing about some of the, um, I guess you could say, like more heavy material, combat related stuff, like with the Abbey Gate story that just came out this month in Leatherneck. Yeah, that was, I don't know, a lot. Actually, one of the guys, Von Straight, who I interviewed for that story, I had. It's actually the second time that I had interviewed him, because I'd interviewed him and actually put a picture of his body in January with one of his tattoos, and then he was with First Battalion, 8th Marines, uh, in Afghanistan, and so I interviewed him again for this story. So, I guess I say all that to say, I think some of those more lighthearted and fun stories that I wrote kind of opened some doors and introduced me to some folks that then hopefully will allow me to continue writing some more of the more difficult things that these guys have been through. But it's interesting, about, I think what I'm seeing about, or what I'm learning as far as sharing their stories. I think that uh, I think it might just be like a Marine thing, as far as, not it's not that you're not willing to share your story, but it's just like we're Marines. We
You're
don't,
just doing your job.
yeah, and we don't need to, or we don't want to. Maybe it's not we don't want to, but we don't really need to, because we're Marines. I don't know. It's just what we do. Um, but and then I think it's also just interesting now, because pretty most of the guys and gals that I interviewed for the Abbey Gate story, um, they all like had their phones and stuff over there. And so it's like
Right.
the process of sharing your experience going through something like that is something that you can now do, if you want, on Instagram as it's happening. So that's been kind of weird, but I think there's a difference between, like, taking pictures and sharing them on social media, and then coming home and having time to, like, kind of process it, I guess, and then talk about it after the fact. Those two things are definitely very different. Um, and so I don't know. I just hope that I can find. I hope that I will find that the younger generations of Marines are at a point where they can, feel comfortable kind of analyzing and sharing their stories as well. But, I don't know. I haven't had the chance to really interview many, like, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans yet, as far as, like, early 2000s era. So I hope to, and hopefully they'll be just as willing to share their stories with me.
Well, since you brought up the August story about the Marines who were at Abbey Gate, do you mind talking about that a little, since that's our cover story this month, and um, you spoke earlier about starting out with the lighthearted things and then working your way into some of these heavier topics. So how then, when you are covering a heavier topic like this story about the Marines at Abbey Gate, how do you keep that from, I don't know how to say it exactly. How do you make sure that that doesn't weigh you down personally?
Well, it does. Like that. I think that the Abbey Gate story in particular is. I mean, there's just not anything good about it.
No,
It's
right.
it's it's tough to learn about. It's tough to write about. Um, but nowhere near as tough as it was to experience, I guess. So, for me, I think the kind of the saving grace for me is that I have the opportunity to just share the stories of these Marines who were there, and hopefully I got it right. Hopefully, I told it as best I could. But I didn't necessarily approach that story any differently than I did any Vietnam story or anything that I write really. It's just tried to just come up with some very, very general questions and then shut my mouth and let them talk and just see where the story went, I guess.
And just a kind of shameless plug for the magazine and for the job you did. I really encourage all of you who are listening to either go to the website and take a look at his story if you're a member and subscriber to Leatherneck. Pick up your magazine, but then go to the website. We have special members only content within the digital issue of the magazine. And Kyle, you made some connections with some of the combat correspondents who were there. And so we had the opportunity to publish some images they supplied for you that haven't really been seen by a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Really compelling. It's hard to look at some of those images and I mean, there's no way you can't be affected just looking at those images.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one thing that I was really pleased with for the story was that I was able to get in touch with Melissa Marnell. She's a gunnery sergeant on active duty now, combat photographer. I saw her name on several photos and several amazing photos, and it just occurred to me like, and her job over there was to observe, and take photographs. And like her job over there was essentially through photographs doing what I'm attempting to do through writing, which is just to document what happened there.
Right.
And so it just occurred to me like, duh, she's probably like one of the best people that I could talk to about this. So I was able to reach out to her. She agreed to speak with me, and you can read the story to hear her words, but I think she definitely uh, added a lot of powerful uh, voice to the story.
Yeah, she definitely did. So what advice do you have for a young up and coming writer who wants to write about anything really, but most specifically marine issues or military issues? What is your advice?
Boy, I mean, I guess I would say just do it. Just write. I mean, you're not going to get any better, or you're not going to hear any feedback if you don't just write and then give it to somebody somewhere. That's what I did. There was no magic formula. I outside of my bachelor's degree in history, I haven't had any like formalized training on writing or whatever. I just kind of started doing it because I had interest in it, and then submitted it to Leatherneck, and it worked out. And that's what I would recommend. Just if you're wanting to write, then just do it and find somewhere that could maybe get published. And that's, I think, how you're going to get that initial feedback on your writing, at least outside of some sort of academic setting. But yeah.
To piggyback off of Nancy's question, what advice would you give to writers specifically involving interviewing either veterans or specifically Marine Corps veterans?
Well, I think I think maybe where that could apply would be, maybe like there's some family members out there who have like a father or a grandfather or something like that they're interested in learning, their family member's story that maybe they've never heard. I would just encourage them to just be willing to ask the questions. And if their loved one isn't, or if they're the veteran that they're trying to speak with isn't willing to share, maybe they just are waiting for the right time. You know, I've definitely had that too. You know, people who were uh, quite upset that I managed to find their phone number and call them because they didn't want to be found, and they definitely didn't want to talk to me about what they experienced, and that's okay. You know, they're not wrong in that. You know, the people who do want to talk to me, they're not right in that. There is no right and wrong. It's just, you know, whatever's right or wrong for each individual. Um, and yeah, but for, you know, for whoever's, you know, would be interested in writing to try to, you know, write about those sorts of things, I would just encourage them to just don't get in the way of the veteran who's trying to share their story. Don't come at it with an agenda to start with. Just be open-minded and have some general questions to ask, and then let the veteran tell you the story. I don't particularly feel like I have any special skill in writing or whatever. Literally all I do is take what these people tell me and write it down. Like they could do that. They would maybe do that too. You know, I don't know. It just let the veteran tell you the story. Don't interrupt them. Don't try to lead them with questions. Just let them tell you the story, and then it's probably going to be so much better than you could ever come up with anyway.
What's on your? I'm sorry, William. Were you getting ready to ask a
No, you're
question?
fine.
Okay. I was just gonna say, what's on your wish list for stories to tell, people you'd want to talk to, like your dream wish list? It doesn't have to be Leatherneck specific.
Um, that's a good question. That's a tough one. I guess I've been so kind of wrapped up with some of these other stories that I've been working on. You know,
Good.
I guess I don't totally have a wish list at this point because some of my wish list items have been knocked off already, you know, um like as a freelancer for the last decade, I had like 30,000 ideas just like, you know,
Sure.
bogging my brain down. And now as the full-time staff writer, it's like, well, I better write or I'm going to get fired. So I've been able to actually work through, you know, a decade's worth of ideas that I have in my mind. Um, Probably the biggest one recently was writing A Knife in a Gunfight about Jim Stogner. Like that was definitely, as soon as saw him, heard his story of receiving the Navy Cross, I was like, I have to meet that guy and write about him. And I was able to do that. Um, Another one that is on my wish list, which will hopefully be completed next year, uh, ever since that second story that I wrote about the Van Orden family, ever since I met George Van Orden, who lives here in Virginia, um, he told me about the minefield maintenance Marines down at Guantanamo Bay. Um, that seems like an absolutely fascinating yet like barely known piece of Marine Corps history. Um,
Sure.
that I've been wanting to write about ever since I met George. So hopefully that'll happen this coming year. Um, but yeah, I mean, outside of that, nothing immediately comes to mind. But I mean, yeah, I just feel like I've had this wish list in my head for so long, and I'm just so thankful I'm finally having the opportunity to get some of these stories out.
It's our
Well,
the benefit is ours. Go ahead, William.
absolutely. So, but as we start to wrap up this interview, you mentioned something earlier that I want to touch on because it sounds like pretty awesome. Tell me about working at the armory at the Marine Corps Museum. Like, what were your experiences there like? Because that sounds like a pretty sweet gig to me.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. So um, at the time, uh, you know, there were like I was there with, you know, three other guys that worked there, really two others full time. But you know, the armory of the Marine Corps Museum is actually on base in Quantico. It's not at the museum itself. Um, but I mean, they have like everything there. Like any sort of, firearm or edged weapon that you can think of, from like a 13th century Chinese hand cannon all the way through, an M16A4, they've got it there. And yeah, it's pretty neat, just being able to go there, open up the drawers, move the shelves around, and just see like oh man, you're wanting to learn, what it was like to be, I don't know, John Basilone carrying around a machine gun, on Guadalcanal. Well, go pull it off the shelf and see how heavy it is, and just imagine what that must have been like, or, anything. I mean, it's just crazy being surrounded by the history there. And I just remember like thinking like, man, like people get paid to do people get paid to do this. Like man, my history degree didn't have to just be like a last minute decision because I wanted to enjoy the rest of my college experience and then not go back home and do nothing, like I could actually use that towards something. Now of course, I didn't wind up in the museum field, but still able to use my degree to some extent here. But yeah, that was definitely a pretty unique and pretty cool experience.
Any particular item that that any white whales that you were able to handle or use while you were there?
I think probably the first one that stands out in my mind is to have Rafael Peralta's M16. He was the one who, Navy Cross recipient, um, had a grenade explode, and basically so like the whole side and hand guard of his rifle is all damaged. And that was one that was like, holy cow, you're holding a rifle that is all damaged. It's like, man, man died while he was carrying this rifle in combat. That's the first one that comes to mind. But there's numerous things like that they have there.
I was lucky enough to get a tour one day, and the item that piqued my interest on that tour was Carlos Hathcock's hunting rifle that he learned, his 22, that he learned to pick off squirrels and rabbits with. And so when they let me hold that, and that made me a big hero at home when I could go and say, haha, look at a picture of me with this. But you're right, it's incredible there. It's like this cabinet of curiosities of any sort of firearm and then some that you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. So, Kyle, do you have any future projects you want to plug while you're here, or any social media that our lovely listeners can follow you on, or?
Well, I guess got a few things coming up that I'm working on. Right now for October, working on story for the 40th anniversary of the bombing in Beirut, which is a pretty important story. I think that's going to turn out pretty good. I'm pretty excited for that one. Also, just kind of another, one that's important to me personally. Later this year, I'm going to do one about Marine firefighters. So that'll be, and I'm my other life outside of writing for Leathernecks is I'm a professional firefighter. So that was one that I told Nancy I wanted to write about, just those guys that are Marines and firefighters at the same time. And then yeah, I don't know. I've got a bunch of I don't know. I'm still just trying to work through all these ideas in my head, and I feel like I change my story list for Nancy on a daily basis. But those are two
It's
that
fine.
in my mind that I've got coming up here pretty soon.
Well,
And
awesome.
where
Well,
can
sorry, go Nancy.
no, I was just going to say, where can people find you on social media, or in the world? Where can people find you? I mean, we know where we can find you.
Yeah, I started kind of my own thing a couple years ago as I guess like a nice easy way for me to share my writing with other veterans if they wanted to be able to read something before they agreed to interview me. So I've got a website. It's called Battle Site Zero. It's bzohistory.com. It's also BZO History on Instagram, Facebook, whatever else. But yeah, pretty much all the stories that I write, I also publish on my website. Try to also put some stuff up, on my social media, just about some of the neat experience that I have, some of the reunions I get to go to, and those sorts of things. Which actually, speaking of that, that's actually another thing I've got coming up that I'm pretty excited about. In September, I get to go to Colorado to the Vietnam Tankers Association reunion they're having out there. Gonna finally get to meet in person, hopefully, as long as he's able to come. Harold Rinchie, who was the Navy Cross recipient from Vietnam that I got to write about, I think back in 2019. As well as I'll get to meet in person again Bob Skeels, who's I've been able to write about him, or I read about him twice now. Once just earlier this year with the 90 Days of Grunt story.
Great story.
So yeah, that's going to be, I'm really excited for that, and I get to meet a bunch of other people out there too, hopefully.
Well, Kyle, thanks for coming on our show. We appreciate having you. Before we let you go, I gotta ask you, I guess, one of our ceremonial last questions that Vic usually likes to ask. What was your best day in the Marine Corps?
Boy, my best day in the Marine Corps. It's probably the day that I finally, well, probably I got two that come to mind. The day that I graduated the basic school finally, because I got injured during TBS and I had to have back surgery. So whatever. So the fact that I was able to finally get out of there was like a very momentous occasion for me. Probably the second best day that I have in mind was when I was getting ready to come off active duty out in California, and we just had a nice big cookout with me and all the Marines there, and we had I had a roast of all the Marines. So basically, I just got to come up with like all the things that I would have maybe always wanted to say to the Marines, but I couldn't because I was their lieutenant. That would have been inappropriate. I was able to like finally just kind of roast them all a little bit. So that was just a lot of fun.
That sounds like fun. That sounds like
well,
fun.
Kyle, thanks again. Everyone, please check out all of his articles on Leatherneck, and look forward to seeing your future articles.
Yeah, you'll come back on the show. Come back on the show, right, Kyle?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Good.
All right. Stay safe, audience. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, or Ty Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.